Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the PFAS Soil Remediation Standards Technical Listening Session. We still have a number of attendees coming on board here, so I'm going to wait a few minutes before I get going to allow everybody who's just clicking in to get settled. We have a very good list of people signed up. It looks like we have about 78 right now online. We have a broad mix of stakeholders, including members of the public, various elected officials, consultants, academia, folks in the legal profession. So we have a number of people signed up, and looks like they're still signing in. So I'm going to wait, give it another minute or two just for last few people to get on board, and then we'll get started. For those of you just joining, welcome to the New Hampshire DES PFAS Soil Remediation Standards Technical Listening Session. People are still trickling in, so I'm going to give it another minute or two before I get going. But thanks for joining us today. At last count, we had over 150 or 140 people signed up to attend today, and it looks like we have about 94 currently online, and they're still trickling in, so I'll give it another minute. This session is being recorded, so you don't have to take furious notes, and we'll be posting the recording shortly after the session is over. Well, it looks like the number of people joining us has leveled off, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks everybody for joining NHDES for the PFAS Soil Remediation Standards Technical Listening Session. My name is Jeff Martz. I'm a hydrogeologist and the Bureau Administrator of the NHDES Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau. Our Bureau is tasked with developing PFAS soil remediation standards, and we have a great team assembled to work on that project. And while we are the lead bureau on the development of those standards, we are tapping a number of experts across NHDES as part of the effort to come up with PFAS soil remediation standards. Before I go too much further, I want to talk a little bit about webinar logistics and how this meeting is going to work. If you wish to present a comment today, please indicate that you'd like to do so by typing your name in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Enter your name only, and we will compile a list of people that wish to speak, and we'll call upon them in the order that they sign up. When it comes time for the listening session, you will be identified and unmuted and invited to speak. It's important to note that we have to unmute you on our side, but it's very likely that you will have to unmute yourself on your side. And so if you sign up to speak, please just be aware of where the unmute button is, this little red circle with the line slashed through a microphone, so that you're ready to talk when we call on you. When we call your name and unmute you, please state your name, first name and last name, and who you represent. Because we have a large number of people signed up, we're going to start out with a 5-minute time limit. Depending on how many people sign up to speak, we may have to adjust that time limit so we are sure that we can accommodate everybody's comments. So I want to start out with a little overview of the listening session on development of PFAS soil standards. So I'm going to cover why are we hosting this session and discuss the path towards establishing soil remediation standards. And I'm going to briefly touch on the NHDES and US Geological Survey soil and biosolid study and how that informs the soil remediation standard development. So essentially, the NHDES is hosting this listening session because we want to solicit your feedback so that we can consider it as we develop soil remediation standards. This isn't a requirement, but we think it's a really good idea because PFAS are considered emerging contaminants, which in short means that we don't have all the information that we would like to know about PFAS and how they behave in the environment. And that we recognize that this is an area of extensive study and it's rapidly developing a large information base. So we wanted to reach out to stakeholders and solicit feedback, particularly technical feedback, as we consider development of the SRS. So for those of you who may not be familiar with New Hampshire and how we administer contaminated sites, we have a set of administrative rules, Chapter Env-Or 600, which govern management of contaminated sites. Under those rules, we have ambient groundwater quality standards, or AGQS, for 4 PFAS compounds. Now, there are thousands of PFAS compounds, but we currently only regulate 4 of those compounds in New Hampshire in groundwater. And they are perfluoronanoic acid, or PFNA, perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA for short, perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, PFOS, and perfluorohexane sulfonic acid, or PFHxS. And currently we have ambient groundwater quality standards that were established as a matter of law that are in the units of nanograms per liter for each of these 4 compounds. And for PFNA, it's 11 parts per trillion, which is equivalent to a nanogram per liter, 12 for PFOA, 15 for PFOS, and 18 for PFHxS. Currently, we do not have soil remediation standards for these 4 compounds, but we do have direct contact risk-based values. And these values are subdivided into 2 groups, S1 to protect young children from exposure to contaminated soil, and an S2 for maintenance workers. And these are measured in micrograms per kilogram, which is equivalent to parts per billion. So a different set of units than how we are measuring them in groundwater. It's about 1,000 times greater. 1 part per billion is 1,000 times greater than a nanogram per liter. So just keep that in mind as we talk and consider leaching of PFAS. So earlier, the New Hampshire legislature passed a law requiring DES to initiate rulemaking by November 1st, 2023 for those 4 PFAS compounds that we regulate in groundwater. So this is why we are initiating this process of developing soil remediation standards. So in part, why we're having this conversation and soliciting comments is that work done by other states and entities have come up with very low concentration of leaching-based soil values. This list of values is compiled by ITRC, and numbers here are presented in parts per billion. And what you can see is that some of these numbers are coming in very low, in some cases less than 1 part per billion, and generally in low single-digit part per billion values by many states and others. And what some of the emerging science is indicating is that very low concentrations of these 4 PFAS compounds in soil can contribute to potential leaching risk to contaminating groundwater at the concentrations we're regulating or some of these other states are regulating. So there are 5 factors that we are going to be evaluating as part of the development of soil remediation standards for PFAS. And these 5 factors are based on the New Hampshire DES Risk Characterization and Management Policy, or the RCMP. The first one is direct contact risk-based soil concentrations. And as I showed on one of the earlier slides, these have already been developed, but we'll be evaluating the assumptions and calculations that went into those standards as we consider the development of the new soil remediation standards. The next one is leaching-based soil concentrations, and I've changed this to a red font just to indicate that this is one of the areas where there's emerging science on the leachability of these compounds and how they behave in the subsurface environment. And this was recognized quite some time ago that some of these compounds behave in a different fashion than some of the legacy compounds that we already have soil remediation standards for. And we recognized that we needed to develop some New Hampshire specific data on the leaching conditions of New Hampshire based soils. So I'm going to talk a little more about the USGS soil study, which we initiated to address some of these questions. The third factor is background soil concentrations. The fourth factor is sealing concentrations, which I don't expect this to play a significant role because it involves things such as odor threshold, and PFAS really don't have an odor. So I don't expect this factor to play a big role in the soil standard development. But an important factor is the practical quantification limits, because on one of the earlier charts showing some of the leaching-based values developed by other entities, they were coming up with numbers that were less than a part per billion, and most commercial laboratories are not quantitating below that limit. So we're going to have to consider some of the new EPA analytical methods and what the practical quantification limits are for these compounds. So to inform our SRS development, NHDES partnered with the USGS New England Water Science Center to study the occurrence and behavior of PFAS in New Hampshire's soil and biosolids. The study consisted of 3 tasks. Task 1 was to characterize soil quality across the state at a reconnaissance level to assess PFAS impacts in relatively undisturbed areas. And to accomplish this, we created a grid 100 units where sample locations that met the criteria established for the study were selected at random. And samples were collected for various analyses, obviously including PFAS, at 100 locations across the state. This work is 100% complete, and the results have been presented through the USGS data release website, and they are currently available to the public. Task 2 was to assess partitioning of PFAS in New Hampshire soils and biosolids through a series of laboratory studies. I know analyses of PFAS leaching was being conducted across the country, but soils in other parts of the country may not be similar to what we see in New Hampshire. So we wanted to make sure that we had representative New Hampshire soil samples for this leaching assessment that will include the development of KD values or partitioning values for soil, PFAS in soil and water. Task 3 was to evaluate PFAS transport from soil and water at an AFFF release site in a biosolids application site. So we collected some detailed soil samples, lysimeter samples, and groundwater samples, and that information can be used to help validate modeling of PFAS leachability. So task 2 and 3 are partially complete in the case of task 2, 100% complete in task 3, but this data has not yet been reported. We have a few additional tasks that involve reporting of results and confirmatory sampling. The confirmatory sampling was just completed last week, and we expect the final results for task 2, 3, and the additional sampling to be made public through a data release the USGS data release website, most likely in the month of January. So here's a slide with my contact information. Again, if you're just joining, I'm Jeff Martz, the administrator of the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau and the Waste Management Division. And I want to mention Tanya Justin. She is one of the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau hydrogeologists and project managers, and she is our contact for written comments if you'd like to submit them after this listening session. So again, we're getting now to the point where we're going to start taking public comment. I want to emphasize that this is a listening session. We are not going to be answering questions or responding to the comments that we receive. The purpose of this is to gather stakeholder feedback for us to consider as we develop the soil remediation standards. So again, we won't be answering questions or responding to the comments that we receive. So if you'd like to provide feedback or speak, enter your name under the question dropdown, and we will be compiling a list. I have several staff behind the scenes making this work seamlessly, hopefully, and we'll be calling you in the order that your names are entered. When DES identifies you and unmutes you, it is likely that you will have to unmute yourself on your side, so please be aware of where the unmute button is. And when you're invited to speak, please state your first and last name and who you represent. And right now we're going to start out with a 5-minute time limit. I have somebody keeping time, so they will give you a notice before that time limit is up so you can wrap up your comments. If they have a large number of people signed up, we may shorten this just to make sure we can accommodate everybody. If you have more to say, you can certainly get back in line, or if you think of something additional, you can sign up again, and we'll keep cycling through until the 90 minutes is up. And I just want to mention, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, I have an email for Amy Russo. She is our technical help specialist, and her phone number is 603-848-1372. So if you're having any difficulty, please don't hesitate to contact Amy. So with that, I'm going to turn control back over to Jonna Ford, who is help managing the list, and we will move into the feedback session.
Thank you, Jeff. I just want to confirm that everybody can see my screen with the list.
I'm seeing your screen with the list.
Okay. Everyone, please feel free to type your name in the question box to get on the list. And in the meantime, I will unmute the representative so that she can ask her question. You've been unmuted on our end, and now you can, there you go.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Jeff, for this opportunity. I actually have two questions. I'll try to make them quick. One, when you were determining the background levels in soil, did you, or how did you account for any air disposition that might have occurred from industrial users of PFAS? We know that air disposition, at least in the Saint-Gobain area, has been a major contributor to groundwater contamination. And you know, it's unsure of where did the air go, you know, how far did that disposition occur. So I'm just wondering how that was considered in determining background. And then my second question, could you comment on the current state regulations regarding soil that does contain PFAS and whether it is allowed to be transported from its origin point? You know, if there's any controls for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wrong. And because this is a listening session, we're not going to be answering questions, although I'll just touch briefly on the background because it is part of the introduction here. The USGS study we consider to be an occurrence study, and it's not detailed enough because, you know, we have 100 samples collected across the state, which is a relatively small number given the large area of the state. But you know, our scientists are going to be looking at background more broadly as we develop those soil remediation standards.
Okay, so that's fine. Thanks so much for that clarification. So I would recommend that when background concentrations are used in developing the SRS, that they do account for any air disposition that may have contaminated that soil to contribute to the background. And then I would also recommend that as you move forward on the standards, that take into account or make sure that there's some protection so that any soils that exceed those standards are not allowed to be transported where they may spread that PFAS into areas that have low concentration. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wrong. Jonna, do we have anybody else signed up?
We do not have anybody else in the queue at the moment.
I think we'll give this a few minutes. I know we had a lot of technical experts on the list, as well as other parties representing water systems and various stakeholders. So give them a chance to gather the thoughts and consider signing up for a comment. As I mentioned before, this is being recorded. Our slides will be posted to our PFAS website. So if you think of something at a later point in time, you're certainly more than welcome to email Tanya Justin. Amy Russo, have you had any people contact you with technical difficulties?
Can you hear me now, Jeff?
I can hear you now, Amy, thanks.
Okay, no one has contacted me yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I guess we'll give it a few more minutes, but if we don't have any additional speakers, we'll be ending the session early, but hopefully we'll have a few people that want to speak. Again, if you're just joining us, the process to speak is to enter your name into the question box and submit that, and we'll call on you when that comes through. I think we'll give this another 3 minutes to about 25 after the hour, and then if we don't have anybody wishing to speak, we'll go ahead and close the listening session. Jana, we're coming up on 25
Yes,
past the hour. Do we have any last people signing up here?
we do have someone. I will go ahead and unmute Ross Bennett. You've been unmuted and you can speak now.
Yeah, hi Jeff, hey everybody. Ross Bennett with Golder Associates. I guess I'm, not hearing a lot of comments in general from folks on the call, and I think that might be because the material presented so far is pretty broad, and maybe until there are more specifics on the table, there might not be much to comment on. So I guess my one comment might be to do another listening session when you're further along with the evaluations. Might get a lot more comments at that point.
Thanks, Ross. We'll take that recommendation under consideration. Appreciate that feedback. I know as everybody considers what we've talked about today, if you have ideas, technical thoughts, considerations, don't hesitate to email Tanya Justin. And it looks like we have another person who has just signed up here.
Yes,
Hank?
Hank, you've been unmuted.
Okay. Hank Andolsik with WSP. I just would like you to consider the option of using, once you establish your leaching to groundwater values for soils, to also consider site-specific modeling results that could be used instead.
Great, thank you, Hank, for that comment. Jana, do we have anyone else signing up?
No one else on the list right now.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for the NHDES PFAS Soil Remediation Standard listening session. Thanks to Representative Rung and Ross Bennett and Hank Andolsik for providing comments. If you think of anything at a later point in time, please feel free to email Tanya Justin. Her contact information was presented earlier and is available on the slides that will be posted to the DES PFAS website. So unless we have any last signups, Jana, I think we can go ahead and close the session.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.